Thank you so much, and greetings to the program director, the leadership of the South African Students Association in Russia, distinguished fellow panelists, comrades, and my fellow South Africans shaping their minds far from home. I greet you with clarity, urgency, and purpose. Now, because this theme is not necessarily academic, neither is it theoretical. It is also not decorative. Education of a liberated mind. That to me is a battlefield. It is the front line between a continent that remains dependent and a continent that rises to define its own destiny. So let us now start where it matters most. What is a liberated mind? A liberated mind is not simply a mind that has passed exams. It is not a mind that can quote textbooks, recite theories, or accumulate qualifications. A liberated mind is that which understands power. It understands how history was shaped, how it is sustained, and how it can be changed. A liberated mind knows that Africa is not underdeveloped by accident. It understands that the architecture of colonial extraction, the legacy of apartheid, and the distortions of global trade, as well as the asymmetry of the financial systems. And because it understands this, it refuses to accept Africa's position as permanent. That is the first mark of liberation. Refusal to normalize inequality, refusal to internalize inferiority, refusal to inherit a system and not question it. But refusal alone is not enough, because anger without direction is just noise. A liberated mind does not only refuse, it reconstructs. It asks deeper questions. How do we industrialize? How do we move from exporting raw materials to exporting finished products? How do we build African technology ecosystems that are not dependent on imported solutions? How do we transform education from a pipeline to how do we transform education from a pipeline to unemployment into a pipeline to production? Because, comrades, let us confront the hard truth. Africa is not short of graduates. Africa is short of capacity. We produce degrees faster than we produce industries. We produce knowledge faster than we convert it into economic power. That is not an education crisis alone. It is a strategic crisis. And this is where your role becomes decisive. You are studying in Russia, one of the world's historic centers of scientific engineering and strategic thought. You are exposed to a system that has for decades treated education not as an individual achievement, but as a national instrument, an instrument for defense, an instrument for industrialization, global positioning. So the question is not what you are studying. The question is how you are thinking. Are you thinking like a student or like a builder of nations? Because the 21st century will not reward passive intelligence. It will reward applied intelligence. It will reward those who can convert theory into systems, those who can convert knowledge into infrastructure, those who can convert education into production. That is the education of a liberated mind. It is education with intention, education with direction, education with consequence. Let me put it to you differently. That first phase of our struggle was about political access. The next phase is about economic control, economic power. And economic control requires technical competence, engineers who can solve energy crisis, scientists who can lead innovation, agricultural experts who can secure food systems, economists who understand global capital flows, diplomats who can negotiate from strength and not just sentiment. That is the generation Africa needs right now, not a generation that is overly educated and underutilized, but a generation that is strategically equipped and nationally deployed. Because let me say this clearly, education that does not serve the people is misdirected education. Education that does not reduce inequality is incomplete education. Education that does not build capacity is wasted education. And education that does not transform the economy is not liberation. It is simply decoration. That is why we must reject a dangerous mindset, the idea that education is an escape from Africa. No, education is a return to Africa with weapons of transformation. Your degree is not your exit ticket. It is your responsibility document. It is a contract with history. It says you were given access so that you can build access for others. It says you were given knowledge so that you can multiply knowledge. It says you were given opportunity so that you can create opportunity. That is the moral weight of education. Now, let us connect this to the 21st century. This century is defined by four major forces: technology, energy, trade, and knowledge. Whoever controls these controls the future. And right now, Africa is still largely positioned as a consumer in all four. We consume technology, we export raw energy resources, but import refined systems. We participate in trade on unequal terms. We often import knowledge frameworks instead of producing our own. That is not sustainable, comrades. And it is not inevitable. It is a position that can be changed by a generation that understands the game. That is why your presence there matters. You are sitting in spaces where nuclear science is taught, where advanced engineering is developed, where geopolitical thinking is not abstract, but strategic. The question is, will you absorb it or will you simply pass through it? Because history will not reward attendance. History will not reward you just for going to school. It will reward the impact that emanates from what you have brought from school. And that impact requires discipline. Let me emphasize this. Discipline is the missing link between potential and power. Without discipline, intelligence becomes arrogance. Without discipline, education becomes noise. Without discipline, opportunity becomes waste. But with discipline, even ordinary talent becomes extraordinary contribution. So we must build a culture of seriousness, a culture where studying is not a burden, but a mission, a culture where excellence is not optional, but expected, a culture where mediocrity is rejected, because Africa cannot be built by average thinking. It requires exceptional commitment. Comrades, let me close with this. Freedom in 1994 opened the door, but a door is not a house. Our task is to build the house, to build an economy that works, to build institutions that deliver, to build a society that is just, to build a continent that stands with dignity. And that construction will not be done by slogans. It will be done by minds, liberated minds, disciplined minds, strategic minds, minds that do not just understand the world, but change it. So when you leave this webinar, do not leave inspired only. Leave instructed. Leave challenged. Leave with a question that will not let you sleep comfortably. What am I building with my education? That is the question. Because the future of South Africa and the future of Africa will be built in the minds that refuse to remain small. And I believe I'm speaking to such minds today. Thank you very much.